Good day, class. Let's start off this particular session with a wrap up of our last class and a preview of what we'll be talking about during this particular session. So, we finished up with Sigmund Freud. We discussed his psychosexual stages of development and some of the controversy related to it. We also examined what Freud's current standing is today as we look back at what he did. There were some issues with his notions of repressed memory. Also, he did not really do or conduct experimentation. His theories could not truly be falsified. He had an overemphasis on sex. And today, as we look at his therapeutic approaches, they are very time intensive as well as costly. Despite some of the issues that we may have with Freud as we look back at his work, he did, however, put psychology in a sense on the map. He popularized the discipline. After Freud, there were several changes that were made with the individuals referred to as the Neo-Freudians, with Anna Freud, his daughter, looking at such things as defense mechanisms, among others. Carl Jung, his focus on the collective unconscious and such things as introversion and extroversion. Alfred Adler, who was more interested in the things dealing with inferiority or feelings of inferiority. And Karen Horney, who was interested in feminine psychology. So now we'll look at Wilhelm Wundt, who's sort of associated with the start of psychology as a discipline. However, there were others who could have had this accolade as well. But we look at him because of what he did, as we'll discuss in this particular section. So we'll be looking at the first school of psychology. We'll be looking at such concepts as volition, looking at the research focuses that Wilhelm Wundt conducted in his early experiments. We'll look at his goal of psychology, which was to understand the basic processes of mind in complex conscious phenomena. He also examined and looked at experiences being either immediate or immediate. He looked at basic types of mental experiences. He looked at perception or apperception. Apperception being the active type of what one attends to in the environment. He also thought about the perceptual field, made up of the stimulation in the environment plus the physical makeup of the person plus those person's past experiences. He also thought about the complex higher mental processes, things that can be deduced from culture and religion. So let's start off with voluntarism. Voluntarism is the name that Wundt gave to his approach to psychology. It was voluntarism because of its emphasis on will, choice, and purpose. What people chose to do, their purpose, and things of that nature. Voluntarism then was psychology's first school of thought. Not necessarily structuralism. There's some debate there. But the idea that I want to communicate to you here is that voluntarism was different than structuralism. And it was one of the ideas that Wundt approached psychology with. So who was Wilhelm Wundt? A German medical doctor, a physiologist, a psychologist, and a professor. And he studied with some of the individuals that we've already talked about previously, like Mueller and Helmholtz. So these were some of the people who influenced him. So he is designated as the individual who started psychology as an academic discipline officially. He created the first psychological laboratory in 1879, where he studied basic and higher order thinking and applied issues. Also did the first journal of psychological research in 1881. So the idea here is that Wilhelm Wundt is credited with, for the first time, having a university put aside location and resources for the explicit use in studying psychological ideas. So what are some of Wundt's achievements and contributions? He took the diverse achievements of other researchers and his own early research on attention and synthesized them into a unified program of research. So one of the things that makes it so that he is seen as, in a sense, the father of the discipline of psychology is that he looked at all the other stuff that was going on at the time and was able to synthesize that into a unified program of research. He determined that this program must stress on what he looked at as selective attention, what we selectively attend to in our environment, and that is volition. So psychology's first school was formed. And what is a school? A school can be defined as a group of individuals who share common assumptions, work on common problems, and use common methods. It's similar to Kuhn's paradigm. So this school was called voluntarism. Now, schools also tended to have this idea about what types of solutions they would be looking for as well. So here are some of the multiple research directions of Wilhelm Wundt. He was examining things in the area of psychophysics, the measurement of sensations, psychometry, the duration of mental processes, our time sense, time relations of perceptions, the estimation of intervals of time, and also the association of ideas, the time it takes for one idea to suggest another. So we see a bunch of directions that which he was focused on in his early research programs. So Wilhelm Wundt, he established a laboratory, 4 rooms, but later was expanded to 6 rooms. An international collection of 20 researchers worked in groups of at least 2. And some of these individuals would be some well-known individuals who would also make names in psychology for themselves in their own right. 2 researchers were needed, with the one acting as the subject and the other taking charge of the apparatus and registering the results. The research would be published in the study of psychological studies. So, as mentioned in the overview, Wilhelm Wundt had as psychology's goal was to understand both simple, basic processes of the mind and complex, higher mental processes of conscious phenomena. For simple phenomena, experimentation was to be used. However, for complex phenomena, experimentation could not be used. Only various forms of naturalistic observation could be used. So what he was doing here, he was sort of drawing a line in the sand, identifying that he could not use experimentation for all the various ways in which one could study psychology. That he had to use other methodologies to employ certain more complicated or complex phenomena, whereas the basic processes of the mind could indeed be studied experimentally. So, going back to what he was looking at. So, this thing that we experience, he broke it down into 2 types of experience. Mediate experience, and data are obtained via measuring devices and thus is not direct, and immediate experience. And data here are events in human consciousness as they occurred. For Wilhelm Wundt, it was this immediate experience was the subject matter of psychology. So let me explain to you this idea. We've talked about this before in a different venue here. I do not immediately hear the truck coming down the street. I immediately hear the sound. That is the immediate experience. My perception of the truck in this case is immediate. So what we're seeing here is immediate is more of your perception, how you make sense of the sensations that you are experiencing. But the experience itself, the actual sensation, without you putting your identifiers on it or your descriptors on it, that first contact, that immediate sense is the sound, and that is your immediate experience. So let's look at some of the methodologies that he employed. He employed a variety of methods of experimentation, but primarily he utilized introspection. His experimental introspection was not the unstructured self-observation used by earlier philosophers. Wundt's introspection used laboratory instruments to present stimuli. In most instances, the subject was to respond with a simple response such as saying yes or no or pressing the key. These responses were made without any description of internal events. It was used to study the immediate experience, but not the higher mental processes. So it was most likely that they would press a button or say yes or no, whether or not they were able to sense something or when they sensed something in their immediate experience with regard to the stimuli being presented to them. So there are two basic types of mental experience: sensations and feelings. Sensations occurred when a sense organ is stimulated and the impulse reaches the brain, describes in terms of modality, intensity, and quality. So we're looking at senses here. And then there were feelings. Feelings accompanied sensations and could be described along three dimensions, the tridimensional theory of feelings: pleasantness versus unpleasantness, excitement versus calm, strain versus relaxation. So let's look at this a little bit more closely here. Perception, attention, apperception, and creative synthesis. Perception is passive process governed by the stimulation present, the physical makeup of the person, and the person's past experience. So what we perceive is going to be part of the thing that we see in the real world. Our physical makeup, for example, if we're looking at something visually, we're seeing something, we have to take into account the physical makeup of the person. Is my eyesight perfect? Or do I need corrective lenses? Do I see something clearly? So the physiology of the person, their makeup, does matter. And the person's past experience. What we know does filter into what we perceive. Again, we've talked about this several times already in this course, is that we cannot divorce ourselves from our past experience or our training. So these things must be accounted for in our perception. It's a passive process, but it is governed by the stimulation, the stimuli that we're looking at, the physical makeup of the person, and our past experiences. The interactions of these factors make up the person's perceptual field. The perceptual field is made up of all those factors. Now, the part of this field the person attends to is apperceived. So, of all the things there we have that are possible for us to focus on, we are focusing on something specific. Something is the focus of our attention. The part of this field the person attends to is apperceived. Apperception and selective attention are basically the same. What we selectively attend to and the things that are available and possible for us to attend to. We are apperceiving something. So apperception and selective attention are the same. Apperception is active and voluntary. Hence, the reason the school is called voluntarism. It's about what we attend to, what we apperceive. Creative synthesis. The elements which are attended to can be arranged and rearranged as the person wills. Thus, arrangements not experienced before can be produced. This is yet another idea that we've seen talked about and discussed before, where we have these elements, these things that we have now available to us, and we can rearrange them to make new stuff, to make new experiences in a sense. This Wilhelm Wundt called creative synthesis. So let's look at some of the things that he did in his experimentation. Mental chronometry. He used a method developed by Donders to measure differences in reaction time when various mental activities were required by the experimental situation. So he's looking at the time it takes for us to do things or to react to things. He looked at physical causality versus psychological causality. Physical causality is a reality because events could be predicted on the basis of antecedent conditions. However, psychological causality was difficult and was not possible. Then let's look real quickly at how he viewed these higher mental processes. The role of higher mental process in cultural psychology. Wundt did not believe that higher mental processes could be studied experimentally. So let's focus on this. He's not saying these things are not important. Not important as, for example, the basic processes that he did say could be studied experimentally. He's just saying that they could not be studied the same way that the simple processes could be studied. So Wundt did not believe that higher mental processes could be studied experimentally. They were reflected in human culture, which of course is a very complex structure. So the nature of the higher mental processes could be deduced from the study of such cultural products as religion. So we can learn about our higher mental processes from religion, from social customs, from myths that we have, from history, from our language, morals, art, and the law. All these says things about our higher mental processes as human beings. He conducted a 20-year study of these things, which culminated in his 10-volume work called Cultural Psychology. So let's look a bit more closely at some of the things that Wilhelm Wundt did accomplish for us. So the rise of psychology, Wilhelm Wundt. Psychology was about human existence, not helping people. So his idea was trying to obtain information, data, more of a basic type of approach, wanting to know things because we need to know them, not to try to solve particular issues or to help people. He modeled psychology from his perspective after the natural sciences. He wanted to know, how does the mind or the brain work? He did not think of the mind as a specific location. The mind is not a location, but the mind, from his perspective, was a process. Why 1879, the birth of psychology? Again, because space and resources were provided to a location and named experimental psychology. This space and resources provided at the university where Wundt was teaching. Okay, this was a major moment that an institution was putting aside space and resources for the study of experimental psychology. Philosophical Studies was the first true psychological journal, even though it may have been named something different. He wanted to find causal explanations for psychological phenomena. He did not rely on the use of introspection a great deal. Okay, in many ways, many of the things that we do that we call objective is somewhat subjective in nature, if you think about it. So when somebody is shown a stimuli and you say, I've seen it, well, I don't know if you've really seen it. I just know that you report that you have seen it. So in a way, that's somewhat subjective in nature. So he did not rely on the use of introspection a great deal, as some would probably suggest. I did skip a few slides that are in your notes here because they were quite redundant, but I did want to point out a couple of things real quickly here. Wundt rejected materialism. He agreed with Mueller's vitalism. Okay, remember John Mueller suggested this idea of vitalism, this life force that was something that was animating our nervous system in a sense. Helmholtz disagreed with it totally and thought that everything that is us, our life energy, can be described by the biological, chemical, and physiological processes that we go through. So he agreed with Mueller and rejected Helmholtz's materialism with regard to the mind, stating basically consciousness cannot be possibly be derived from any physical qualities of material molecules or atoms. He was also a determinist. He acknowledged that the process underlying volitions may not be known or knowable, but they are controlled by laws. And also looking at this idea of consciousness and looking at some of the details, he viewed ideas as composed of several sensations, and we have these composite feelings, several feelings mixed together. And these emotions are a typical form in which affective processes occur. Emotions have a temporal quality, beginning, a middle, and an end. We have an emotional event, so it's based on time to some degree. And then we have volitions, changes in ideas and feelings that bring an emotion to a close. So that covers some of the key ideas I want to make sure that we discuss as we talked about Wilhelm Wundt.